Me a story about you met Jack at a college party, and what happened at that party?
Well, we were giving I was with Linda Reeves, and we were giving Barry a ride down to College Park because her sister-in-law lived there, and we were going to visit her sister-in-law. And well, Barry said, "Hey, if you girls want to come to a party, my brother is he lives near campus and he's having a party." And so we went out and did our thing. We went to dinner and had our seafood or something. And then Linda said, "Okay, let's go to the party." And I said, "No, we're 30 years old." And she was 34. I said, "I don't hang out with, college students." And she said, "Well, I'm going to the party."
With or
So
without you?
she was, with or without me. So she was my ride, and I had to go. So I went, and I met this guy. I was in line. I was going into the bathroom. There was a line to go to the bathroom. And this guy had a blue jean jacket with all these Grateful Dead buttons on it. And I said, "So you like the Dead, huh?" And he said, "Yeah." And we started hanging out, and he was really nice. And I went back to his apartment. Nothing happened. But we crashed on the floor or on the sofa or something. And he asked me what my phone number was, and he didn't write it down. And I said, "Why aren't you writing it down?" He said, "Oh, I don't have to. I can remember it." And I said, "Yeah, right." And then he called me 2 weeks later. And he hadn't written my number down, and I was really impressed with that. He invited me to
Didn't
go.
something crazy happen at that party?
No. Nothing happened.
He didn't break his hand or hurt his hand or something?
Oh, that was the first time I came down to see him. It was after the Grateful Dead concert. We went back to his apartment, which was a house. He lived with a bunch of guys. And these guys, broke into the party. And, look at that. Wow. They crashed the party. Jack had a birthday, in a bathroom off of his bedroom. Thank you. And these guys came into his bedroom, and they took a beer bottle and broke it and came at Jack with this broken bottle. Jack's a lefty. He punched this guy out with his left hand. It broke his hand, basically. It broke the small bones in the top of his hand.
What were they doing with a broken bottle? It sounds like rough and tumble. You're
Yeah.
getting involved with a...
They were like gang kind of guys.
You're getting involved with a shady character over here.
I thought that maybe Jack was a shady character, but
I mean, what were they after?
I don't know.
I think we need to ask him about this.
Well, they called the cops. And they took the guy. His roommates took the guy. And somebody had his arms and somebody had his legs. They threw him in the shrubs. He was really out of it. And the cops came. And Jack's hand was swollen. Like, it was a big lump on the top of his hand. It's still there. I mean, if you look at his left hand.
So you met him at line at a party because of his Grateful Dead vest.
Mm-hmm.
Then he called you 2 weeks later, remembered your number, and impressed you. Then you went down to visit him, and this craziness happened.
Yeah.
Then what happened?
Then he came up to see me.
Where's up? Where were
I
you
was
at?
living with Garrett, with Nancy.
Okay, so tell that story. So how did you get from... how'd you get from Potomac to hanging out with college kids in College Park to living in Garrett County? Or were you already living in Garrett County when you went to that party?
I was already living in Garrett County.
Okay, so how'd you get to Garrett County? Of all places.
I know. Well, because after college, Jill, who I lived with, Jill was my friend. She was an art major. She was my friend in college. Her parents lived in McLean, Virginia, which is just over the river from Potomac. So we hung out after college.
After college in Ohio at Wittenberg. you came back to Maryland and had a friend that lived in the DMV.
In the DMV.
DC, Maryland, Virginia.
Oh, yeah. Jill lived in McLean, and my mom got her a job at Holton Arms School where my mother worked. My mother was a librarian.
Okay, so
So
how did that lead to Garrett County though? Because we already heard that story.
okay, so how that led to Garrett County is that Jill, after the job ended at Holton Arms, Jill went to Rockville and lived in a group house with a bunch of people. We were like in our mid-20s. Vivian and Vicky, and they were friends. Some people had left this house, but they still kept their friendship going. And people that used to live in the house, they moved away, but they would come back and visit. One of those persons was Fran and Gloria, and Fran had just moved to Garrett County, Maryland. We didn't even know what Garrett County was.
Franny Otero.
And
Gloria
Salazar, their cousins.
Oh.
And they both lived in Garrett County. And Franny had moved up here and married a guy who lived up here. And she was married to a guy named Mal Millington. And Mal had a brother who was married to a girl named Maggie. Maggie and Franny started to be good friends. They were sisters-in-law. They were good friends. Maggie had a job teaching art in Garrett County, in the Garrett County school system. And so we started coming up to Garrett County to visit Franny. And Jill met a guy up here who was from Cleveland. He was living in a geodesic dome. And he had built a log cabin. And she used to come up. So I would come up with Jill to visit. And Franny started coming up a lot. And she divorced Mal. And she married another guy who came up to Garrett County a lot because his grandmother lived here. That seemed to be the thing. Like Steve Schaefer's grandmother lived here. Or in West Virginia, right over the line in West Virginia. And Keith's grandmother lived here. In Accident in the Cove. And so Franny married Steve.
And Jill married
Keith. But by that time I was living here. When I got invited to her wedding, I was living here. And
where was your first apartment?
I lived in the National Hotel in Grantsville. Downtown Grantsville. It was an old hotel from the 1800s. It was a stop on the highway, because Route 40 was the national highway, and it was pretty famous for being a stop for people going west.
So that is at the intersection of 40 and Main Street, Grantsville, and 495. Like the only intersection in Grantsville, basically.
Yeah, there was a light there, and
I don't even think there's a light there now.
There isn't a light anymore. Well, the building was all made of wood.
We've regressed.
Yeah, and it was a fire hazard, and it wasn't up to code, and insurance was impossible for this building. And the woman who owned it, Judy, who was from Baltimore, she and her cousin owned it, and they had this bar downstairs called the Blue Moon Saloon. And she tried to sell it, and she tried to get it on the historic registry. And they kept rejecting her. Finally, she couldn't keep paying for the mortgage on this place. And I guess the rents didn't pay the mortgage. And these Amish people bought it. And when they bought it, we knew what was going to happen. They were going to sell it to a gasoline company like Peter's Fuel. They own Brewston Farm Service.
This is like 25 years later, though, right?
Yeah.
So at the time, the National Hotel still exists. It's a classic building on 40. There's a bar downstairs, the Blue Moon Saloon. Did you hang out there?
Oh, yeah, every night. Yep.
So let's hear about that.
Yeah, I met a guy there, Wally, and he was so cute, and we kind of got together, and he used to go back home to visit his son in Annapolis, and then he'd come back, and I lived with him for about a year in the National Hotel during the week. That was fun. And then I moved out of there, and I moved in with my friend Nancy in her farmhouse, because
Wait, before
they
we
were
get,
touring when they sold the hotel. They were tearing it down.
before we get to Friendsville, oh wait, so you're saying that the reason you moved out of there was because they were tearing it down? So it wasn't 25 years later. It was right after you lived there. They tore it down.
Well, yeah.
Okay, so
It wasn't 25.
let's hear more about the Blue Moon Saloon. You met Wally there.
Yeah.
Anybody else memorable?
Oh, yeah.
Like, name people that are still around Garrett County that would remember the Blue Moon Saloon.
Keith and Rob, they played almost every weekend at
That's
the Blue
Keith
Moon.
Roberts.
Keith
Jill's
Roberts and
husband, and Rob Smith. Cheryl's husband.
Yeah, Cheryl's husband. They were Smith and Roberts, and they made an album, and we loved them, and they played there.
Garrett County time.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And there was a guy who taught English named Mark Grimes. He taught English at WVU, and he would come, and he crashed a lot in my living room. He slept on my sofa because it was a long drive back to Morgantown. And he's still around. And we had a reunion for the Blue Moon Saloon. We had a reunion. There's a lot of people around that used to go there. I basically would go down there in my slippers.
Because you lived upstairs.
Yeah, because I live upstairs.
And then...
and Mike Fratz's parents, apparently, she said, I met you years ago. And I said, no, I met you when we were pregnant with our babies. She was pregnant with Mike, and I was pregnant with Colin. And I said, what do you mean you met me years ago? She said, Carolyn, we used to go upstairs during the breaks in the music to your apartment, and we'd drink and smoke up in we were 17. She and her husband were like 17 years old, and they were up in I said, you were in my apartment smoking? Oh my God. I didn't know that.
Fancy Joe.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were married straight out of high school, right? Or they're still in high school.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's funny. You got underage kids drinking in
Yeah,
your apartment.
I
But
did.
the drinking age was 18 at the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so no big deal. What about the bartender?
Kenny Piaskowski. Yeah, when he was sweeping up the floor, at the end of the night, he'd yell, "Save the pieces! Save the pieces!" And he was crazy, and everybody knew about Crazy Kenny, the bartender. He was from Baltimore, and he managed bars in Baltimore, and he knew the business, and he was quite a character. And I still know him. He's still crazy.
Yeah, he came to visit you in the hospital, right?
Yeah, he did.
He called the house, and I talked to him, and he
Yeah,
said,
you told him.
here's what's going on with Mom. And that minute, he dropped everything, and he drove to the... Well, actually, it's not. He didn't drop everything. He went to give blood down there near where you were at.
Oh,
And then he said, I'll stop in on the way.
okay.
So anyway, that kind of segues into Friendsville, but I want to just wrap... it's just interesting to me that Grantsville was your first destination from, Potomac.
Yeah. What a shock.
And you're still here.
What a cultural shock that is. Yeah.